Thank you, Jay, and thank you to the Korea Society for hosting us. I wanted to, oh, I was so excited for this conversation and I volunteered for it because Fiona is a very, very unique and special person in the context of global Korean cultural rise, I would say. And there have been multiple times in my career being a writer and a reporter and an editor, um, focusing on Seoul and Korean culture, where I've often wondered, oh my gosh, how did this happen? How did this particular, designer or this particular company bridge the international gap and climb the wall and find itself in a very unusual position? And if you get to the root of how that happened, I found Fiona in the root. So she's almost a magician. She has a very incredible handle on what's interesting and how to, I guess, um, talk about it in a way that I feel like Koreans in Korea sometimes don't know the global context, but she can help them, make it through. And I wanted to talk about, your background, first of all, and your work, because it's such a unique shepherding of Korean culture into the global stage. So, yeah, can you talk a little bit more about your professional career and, all the different companies and individuals that you've worked with? Just a smattering.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your very flattering introduction, Francis. I met you, what, 12 years ago?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we were trying to
when you
figure
were,
out
yeah,
which project it was that we
I
met
was
on.
pitching. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I was at Hyundai Car trying to pitch one of their uh, libraries to you when you were at CNN. So I've been running communications agency for 12 years now. But before that, I was in charge of international communications at Hyundai Card and Hyundai Capital, where when they were becoming like the largest sponsor for MoMA and bringing like Monocle magazine to Korea. So it was a very interesting time.
And for those of you who are not familiar with kind of the cultural status that Hyundai Card has amassed as a credit card company in Korea, they have built these incredibly beautiful spaces of art, the libraries being kind of foremost. And it's they have sponsored concerts that are very hard to get tickets to, bringing international superstars into Korea, and again, heightening their cultural cachet.
So I started my agency because I felt that there were very few a- agencies which were helping Korean brands and institutions getting international recognition. So I started it and started working with some chefs, international food festival to promote Korean food, and then they started sending me the vouchers, meal vouchers, because instead of actual fee. So I realized that I can't do this anymore. And then I got interested in design and architecture. And something I realized that I think is still is still quite the same, even with the very large Korean corporations. They're so busy creating things and working very hard, but they're not as good at promoting themselves.
Mm.
Like if you look at the large corporations, for instance, like Hyundai, Samsung, LG, they tend to have a much bigger team when it comes to deal with the local press. But the
Mm.
international PR team is so small, and they're not really good at pitching stories. So that's how I started my agency. And this book opportunities came about 5 years ago when our mutual contact put me in touch with Thames and Hudson, one of the largest art publishers in London, and told the international content director that it's time for you to do a Korean book, like Korean
Mm.
culture, and there is a person I want you to meet. So I had a first meeting in London about 5 years ago, but the concept they had was quite different from how it came out. So he mentioned this book called Fruits, which covered street fashion in Tokyo in 90s. So I said, but I think it's different era. Like people consume images from Instagram and YouTube, and also realize there is a very little, as going back to what you just said, Francis, I realized there is a very little text explaining why and how Korean culture was gaining such big influence, international influence. So I suggested to them, why don't I find people who are shaping this Korean culture and and ask them how and why it's happening. Another questions I wanted to address was, is this going to last? Because I felt like that was a question even Koreans were curious about. Like, is this a fad or whether this will last? So those are the questions I wanted to address for my book.
And when I've read this book several times now because I find it so fascinating, and the creatives that you have picked are not household names that immediately come to mind, and these are the true insiders, and these are the creatives that, for example, celebrities and K-pop stars themselves look to in order to kind of understand what trend is coming, you know, signal like what they can almost hop on in terms of getting the next cool new image and projection per se. So, how did you go about choosing, who to feature? Because I'm sure it was a very difficult process.
Yeah, in fact, it was one of the most difficult part because I wanted people in my book to respect each other and don't pick someone who's not seen as original or creative. Um, and yes, when I first started asking around people, a lot of people said, "Okay, so are you approaching like BTS or Blackpink?" But I told them, first of all, I think they're too busy, and second, I feel like their information and images about them are overwhelmingly like rich, whether you go to Instagram or YouTube or any other like press. But I wanted to share the voices which something you cannot easily find, but something really authentic and the voices that are respected by those mainstream artists themselves. So, for instance, I have this rock star band leader, Hwang Soyoon, and she leads the band called 새소년, and she's the one like BTS admire and all the music producers love. So she actually recently did a single album which featured RM from BTS, and she suddenly became like number one on the global like iTunes chart for a few days. And Soyoon Hwang, yeah, Soyoon Hwang, and spelling. Did you say? Oh, speak louder. Sorry. Okay. Uh, and she tells me I was going to talk more about the creative process, how they become very original, but what Soyun told me is these days it's so difficult to uh, launch a new song because fans they know so much, like they browse everything, and in the past some Korean musicians and other creators from different sectors were often criticized for just copying, because they thought that they could just do it, like people wouldn't know. But these days, fans they are so smart, much more smart, and they're much better informed. So Soyun was saying like it's so tough, like you really need to work harder.
You really need to make sure that you're original and no one has um, yeah, the fans that dig are very formidable
Yeah,
from
yeah.
an artist's perspective. I mean, it's such an incredible thing that this book is out in the world because, coming from the context that I have, constantly always trying to pitch Korean stories for many, many, many years, And at the same time, even in Korea, for example, I interned at Vogue Korea, and one of the editors um, were basically copying a photo spread almost page for page. But then you had these other editors who were doing such incredible work with the Korean hanbok fusion styles. So, that was really interesting to see. And I think that was the precursor to this huge boom of young creatives that you are featuring, who always are citing in these interviews, oh, were criticized for copying, which I know what they're talking about. A lot of music video styles, again, used to be criticized for copying, and now they're fiercely original.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to. Oh, can you talk more about the
Yes.
picking of the?
Yeah, so the title of the book, Make Break Remix, I thought there was a mantra that's what all these creators are doing. And the remix was actually the very easy word to put in the title, because so many creators I interviewed, they mentioned that what we are doing is remixing things. So as a very wide country, young Koreans are very skilled and well versed in browsing the digital platforms and observe whatever it's cool. And there is no boundary for us. So we pick the trends from like Colombia and like South Africa, France, and Japan, and we remix it. But the I realized after interviewing these people, the reason is not just simple copy, is because they work so hard to make sure that it's not something they just bring, but they remix it to make sure that it's something original and something new. So, for instance, there is a fashion designer called Bajou, who's a creator of this streetwear brand called 99% is, and he has a cult following among LA musicians. Pharrell Williams is a big fan, and I went to see him when he was preparing for the next collection, and I saw these hundreds of images of certain hoods posted on the wall. So I asked, like, what is this? And he said, I wanted to design some hoods for my collection, and I wanted to make sure that nobody has done it. So he spent days and nights researching it, and he's the one who will lock himself in a hotel rooms for 7 weeks whenever he's preparing for the new collection. And that kind of hardworking ethics and the passion, when you remix it with that attitude, I think it really they develop the confidence that they can call it original. And I think that originality and that brave and bold attitude to create something new resonates with young people. Like they recognize it.
It's a paradigm shift,
Yeah.
truly. And that reminds me, a lot of the themes that come up often in the interviews is this idea that you have to absorb first. So I think the difference with this new generation is that they really spend a lot of time absorbing and doing the work of studying the industry that they are in, and then gaining the confidence at that point to say, oh, okay, I know what's out there, and I know what would be new, and being able to create that way.
Yeah.
And it's this almost like 공부.
Yeah, study
like a
very
study.
hard. Like, yeah,
I think it's the studying that really, and the difference with
the
K-pop
eager
too.
to learn new things.
Yeah, the ability to actually, and you talk about it in your intro. I wanted to ask you that the suppression it was a big step into the rebellious spirit. So
Yes.
can you talk a
Yeah.
little about that?
Sure. So in my introduction, I was trying to explain like social, political, and cultural context why this was happening. Because people, when I was doing interviews in the UK, people asked me, okay, so other young people in other countries, they know how to browse, they know how to observe. So why is it happening in Korea? So I explained that, and a lot of people also asked me, why now? why Korea is gaining so much influence all of a sudden. And Korean creators and artists from the book will tell you, no, we have been doing this forever. Like whether it was a car that we are producing or the like any products that Korea has been a very export driven country because it's a very small country squeezed between Japan and China and heavily influenced from the US. In 60s and early 70s, we were one of the poorest countries in the world. We were poorer than Bangladesh. We were poorer than North Korea, and in but the economic boom started in 70s. So it was a very fast moving, fast changing society, which as a result full of competition and speed, and that trains people to become competitive. And when it comes to creating contents, it works as well. So Leah Kim, the biggest choreographer behind the K-pop, she told me that she feels so empty when she puts so much efforts to come up with the best choreography for a new song. But no matter how hard she works, every song only gets 2 weeks on TV and radio to promote, and she feels so empty. But that kind of speed and competition train Korean creators to be so so talented in churning out creative contents. So that kind of competition and going back to your question, the rebellious attitude. So in Korea, because it was such a fast changing society, the path for the success has been very narrowly defined. So you have to go to certain school, and I actually didn't even want to raise my kid in Korea because when you're 4, people are already having a tutors and sending your kids to all these different classes because they need to send them to certain kindergarten, to like elementary school, and then certain university, and then you're expected to go work for like Samsung and Hyundai, or maybe like investment banks. But so that kind of suppression, I think every single creator from my book, they're the ones who is almost like a counter reaction to that suppression, that I'm going to break the mold and be myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that attitude really resonates with people in other countries because every young kid, I think, wants to have that in their heart, and they don't want to be like their parents, and also because Korea is such a fast changing society, the generation gap in Korea is much bigger than other societies. So now that I'm living in the UK, for instance, I still find it amusing how my husband he hangs out with his parents' friends, and that's like unheard of in Korea. And so the rebellious to break the old order because they don't really associate, Koreans don't associate with their parents like fashion style or their lifestyle, and it actually brings out this rebellious attitude, I think.
Yeah, and I think the suppression part is always the most fascinating part for me when I'm looking at creatives and the explosion, which one of your interviewees talks about, the Korean explosion, um, and speed. Speaking of speed, one of her interviewees, Kim Youngjin, stylist for NCT, a K-pop group with SM Entertainment, he talks about how he sometimes has 2 or 3 days to turn around costumes for 9 members. And you know, speaking of the obsessive fans will notice every detail. So the level of intricate, balance of beautiful creative costumes is such a huge part of the creative, overall look. And they have 2 or 3 days to put that together. And they do it. They do it consistently every time.
Yeah.
So the number of reps is just part of the insanity and the explosion, I suppose. What can you talk a bit about speeds? And you were speaking about it more, but the trends, why do you think it's so quick and just shocking.
Right. So it's an interesting irony and contrast in Korea. So I interviewed this Vogue digital director who's now actually recruited by BTS agency, and now she's their style director. And actually, it's not really about speed that I want to touch on. I want I will tell you what really surprised me. So when I ask her, like, so how is it working with these uh, young kids, like groomed to be next idols at the BTS agency Hive? And she said, I feel like I'm a basketball coach. What she meant was when she was at Vogue, when she does the photo shoot, like with a really big celebrity, she could really tell them what they are going to do, and they will just respect her, and they'll do the shoot. But with these new teenagers, like 16 and like 17, they don't just follow the order. She said, and she really has to try to persuade them why she thinks these certain costumes will like, make them better, look them better, and it'll look good as a group. So it's a constant discussion, she said. And when people say like Korean K-pop is so manufactured and it's just one style, like she said, it's changing. Even this biggest agency, the young kids, they are raising their own voices. So I thought it was really interesting. But going back to your speed and competition, she said, but I don't think I can do this job for much longer because I cannot go to sleep until 2 a.m. because that's when these kids stop. So she said, like, this speed and competition is just so exhausting.
And so I remember reading one of them say the trends, Koreans embrace trends so quickly and then they get bored even more quickly.
Right.
And I think that's so true. I'm going to Korea again in 2 weeks, and every year I feel like it's a completely different place. Just what has replaced,
Right.
what was so big just 1 year ago. And do you find that living in London and being on this kind of straddling both worlds, what do you notice whenever you go back? And you're working right now with Art Freeze.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the difference in the art world and how they are evolving?
Right. So when I go back, I see the newest trends. So because my publisher is British publisher, when I was interviewing my these creators, there are some questions that I didn't really think would be that interesting, but from their perspective, there were a couple of questions that they were really surprised. And one thing was how Koreans are being so proud to be Korean. And compared to my generation, when I go back to Korea now, and when I interview these young people in 20s, that's something really surprised me quite a bit. And I realized that these young generations, like, they don't have a baggage or insecurity as much as we do. So when I was growing up in Korea, I was taught to actually hate Japan because of the history, like how they tried to kill the Korean culture during the Japanese occupation. And in fact, because of the history in Korea, when J-pop and like Japanese culture was so influential across Asia and even the Western world, until 1998, Japanese culture was banned in Korea. Yeah, we couldn't listen to the music or watch the Japanese drama or films. But these days, when you ask Korean teenagers, they think that we are cooler than Japan because of the influence of Korean drama and Korean pop. So there's that side. And the solidarity is something both publisher and I found quite refreshing. So the British people, my editor was saying, like, you wouldn't expect the British people to openly like claim that I'm proud to be British, or it look down almost. But Koreans, they're very proud. And as you mentioned, the Kwang he mentioned that because we feel like it's the time for Korea. So rather than like, let's say 20 years ago when there was a harsh competition even among the artists, because we felt that such a small market and we had to really fight. But now, because we feel like it's our time and let's make it last, let's make it bigger. So the people, whether you're a photographer or musician, like documentary filmmaker or interior designer, if they perceive it as an interesting project, people gather. And I've been told by my other friends, like in London and New York, and they haven't seen that in other countries, like the energy and the how the interesting project will gather people from so much diverse sectors is something new. And about the freeze Seoul, I think we were talking about how the studying, like the eager to learn. So I remember one of the top European galleries, Tadeusz Ropak, he told me that he was amazed by the young collectors in Korea. And he said he's never seen that anywhere else in the world, how they are so knowledgeable. So they don't just show up at the fair to like take photo for the Instagram, but they actually come with the knowledge and they understand certain artists, like which era, like why it's so influential and why it's interesting. And they, whether it's a newest fashion trend or it's a contemporary artist, Koreans love to learn. And yeah, that really becomes a big drive for a cultural success.
I've noticed that with a lot of trends. Wine, for example,
Yeah.
being such a boom, everyone is now an expert on every winery around
Right.
the world. And art, for sure, there are all these weekly art classes where it's not for a degree or a certificate, it's purely to understand and amass knowledge about the art world.
Mhm.
These, even Pekwajam having these weekly art classes, I feel like with people flocking to study,
Mm.
it's such an unusual, I think, and they're very academic about it as well.
And yeah,
Did
because
you?
my book is actually very visual, we found this amazing photographer, Les Photo, and we commissioned all the photos for him. So it's a half photo essays and half interview. So I'm just going to share some images from the book with you. Actually, this one wasn't in the book, but I wanted to show this hotel in Hongdae, very creative
I love
area.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I found it very interesting how it's an autograph collection. So it's it's a luxurious hotel, but it really tried to embrace the raw like street culture and youth culture to the hotel. And this actually became a very good base for me when I was recruiting some creators, and I ended up recruiting the fashion designer Ise, who did their uniform, and their community director, who's now the head of Stussy Korea. And as you can see, like the lobby, the very pink raisin, but it's very raw, like the wall. And so I thought it was interesting. And the K style. So this was a quote from one of the design agency in Hong Kong who actually worked in that hotel, and I thought these phrases was very accurate. As a small society, we always have a drive and yearning for external recognition, and I think it became a real drive as well. Uh, and yeah, so when I was interviewing my creators in the book, when I say like, what do you think about the K style, and there was like, what do you mean by K style? So it was a conversation that I had with each individual, each creator. But I think this slide just shows like the attitude that they have, the confident, brave and bold. So she is the Hwang Soyoon, the rock star that I was talking about earlier, and she is
Leah
the
Kim.
Leah Kim, the choreographer. And I also had a really interesting conversation with Leah. So people have debate like why Korean culture has become such influential. So she was asked by the Economist, and the question was, when you come out with a new choreography for a new song, do you try to appeal to the global audience, or do you think about do you think about bringing out something Korean? And she said neither. And she said, I only think about the best choreography to go with the particular song, and how my choreography is going to make the artist stand out. And I thought that was such a brilliant answer. So all these creators, when it comes to Koreanness, it's not something they consciously think about, but they instead they really put their best efforts to come up with their own identity. It's a constant struggle that they're not complacent, and they keep trying to create something new and refreshing and original. And I think as a result, it just feels cool. And I think that's what they're doing. Yeah, so that's Bajo that I told you earlier about these foods and drag performer, most famous
Oh, he
drag
was
performer Nana.
so fascinating. I wanted to ask how you came across him.
How did I find him? I wanted to touch upon like the LGBTQA, and because it's such a still a very taboo, and I do believe that Korea, even though we are known to be very forward-looking, it's still full of irony and contrast. So
Very conservative still
yeah,
in
very
many
conservative.
ways.
But what's really interesting is he got recently recruited by Amore Pacific,
Mm.
this brand called Hera, and they asked him to collaborate. And it's such a established yet very conservative Korean company. And the fact that now they want to work with her
A
means
true
Korea,
change.
yeah,
Yeah.
true change. And she also told me that her, her friends, the gay friends who are still in closet, told her that I'm so proud of you. Like I'm so grateful to you, because my colleagues who are female in my office, they're such big fans of you, and they tell me how much they adore you, which makes me feel like maybe it's okay
To
for
gain
me to
confidence to come out
yeah,
eventually.
yeah, absolutely. Another good example about these contrast and irony. I think I have Doi here. Maybe. Oh, I don't have Doi. So
Yeah, I wanted to ask
yeah.
about Toyi.
So one of the creators that who really wowed me was a tattooist Doi, and he's the one who tattoos like Brad Pitt and Lily Collins. So he's world famous. The Guardian in the UK picked him as one of the top 5 most influential tattooists. So Korean tattoo, I realize, has a status which is, I would argue, even stronger than K-pop. Like globally, if you go to the top tattoo studios, there's so many Korean tattooists, and they mostly actually learn from these tattooist story. So he was design major in Korea, and in Korea we churn out so many design students. When they start working, they don't get paid well. So he got really angry that he wasn't he wasn't appreciated in the society. So he looked for the job where he can use his skills, and tattoo was one of them. But similar to Japan, in Korea, tattoo is associated with the gangsters, uh, and now Korea is the only country where performing tattoo without the medical license is illegal. And his actually mother and wife are both priests, so they got really scared,
Wow.
like, oh my god, I don't want my husband to be drawing the big dragon on the gangster's back. So he came out with this new style of tattoo, which back then tattooists didn't want to touch because it was very like small and detailed. So it was considered to be trivial, and you if you're doing it, it's because you can't do this big colorful tattoo. But because he wanted to attract young customers who are not gangsters, he started studying this new tattoo, and now it's known to be the Korean style tattoo, like delicate and sensitive, very beautiful tattoo. And he became the head of the tattoo union, and he's still fighting. So talking about the irony and contrast, yeah, it's Korean society is still very much full of yeah.
But of course, that's assuming, you're Western centric. So that's, again, a different perspective. But going back to what I was very curious how a lot of these creatives often take such almost a back seat themselves, and they don't want to be on the stage. And I think the Vogue editor was saying how she tried to feature a few designers. They refused because they thought Vogue was too mainstream. I love how Leah talks about, she likes to wear black. The other designers were saying they like to wear black, and they don't really, they kind of remove themselves from the platform and the stage. And did you,
So
feel that when you interviewed them?
yeah, so I realized that the interaction between subculture and mainstream culture in Korea is really interesting. And you earlier talked about how Koreans are really sensitive about trends and how everything changes so fast. So if you consider to be someone very fashionable in Korea, as soon as someone else like that you don't really respect starts to follow, then you instantly drop it because you don't think it's cool enough. But then what's ironic is, and this was a conversation I had with Seoul, that former digital director at Vogue. If you go to a really cool like club or cool shops, and it's full of these hipsters like who are considered to be the hippest kids in Korea, you actually see a very very similar trends. So I think that in Korea, because it has been such fast changing society, even the gap between you and your parents is so big, but then there is a desire for bonding with your peers. So even when it comes to newest trends, the Koreans tend to share, and they like that bonding, they like that solidarity. Yeah.
And I think there is such a divide, not a divide, but such a contrast between what is officially, out there, and then the subculture, what you were talking about, um, talking like the LGBTQ community, for example. I was very surprised when a lot of my coworkers at these big firms would say, "Oh, we're going to a trans club, this weekend in Itaewon." It's a very common thing to do. It's
Yeah,
very
for straight people.
accepted.
Yeah.
But of course, you don't talk about it in mainstream media. But it was still such a pervasive subcultural trend.
Right.
So I thought that that official versus subculture divide is so interesting still.
We should probably open to the
Oh,
Q&A.
yes.
Yes.
Any questions from the audience?
Hello, I just wanted to say thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. I wanted to ask because I feel like I've talked to a lot of people and they're saying like it's about time that this stuff, got the attention that it got. And I was just wondering if the timing was it just so happened to be recently that everything blew up, or do you think that there's sort of a reason now that everything expanded?
So it's it's almost like a common sense when you hear the answer, but a lot of creators acknowledge that the digital transformation. So as you saw from the whole like Squid Games thing with the Netflix, and now they're making so many more Korean series in Korea. Um, and I heard from the CJ, someone who works at CJ Entertainment, that because of the success of certain like Squid Game and subsequently more Korean series, now the budget for producing Korean series in by Netflix is like 5 times higher. And you see the script is much better and the whole set is much better. But even then, uh, if you compare to the US production, it's 5 times lower budget. Yeah, so it makes so much sense for Netflix to keep continuing their investment in Korea for what it brings.
And the turnaround time is so
Yeah,
quick.
yeah, exactly. So like that, which is why production cost is much lower. And so there is a digital transformation. Going back to the tattooist story, so I asked him like, how did Korean tattooists become so popular? And the very very simple answer: before Instagram, they were only using like the Korean platform, but once they start putting their work on Instagram, like overnight, they
Global,
got yeah
immediate
global. They
global
got
attention.
requests like from people like, I want to book you. I'm going to fly to Korea to get your tattoo. So it was like so instant. But digital transformations goes both ways. So in terms of observing the newest trends, it helps Koreans to become faster and faster when they create new contents. But now it's so much easier and cheaper to put out what you have created. So I think that really changed the scenes.
I just have one more question. We were talking about being more open-minded as a society, but also expanding creativity. So I was just wondering if which one came first, or if they came at the same time, or if they just kind of worked together to expand Korean ideas and originality and
Yeah, I think it's really, it goes both ways. But what I found interesting, so I told you one of the questions I wanted to address in the book is whether this Korean culture boom is going to last. And I think it will because of that kind of interaction, the constant efforts to make it more interesting, more diverse, what's new. And so you are seeing big influence coming from music, fashion, and Korean drama and films. And drama and films is not really only, it's so complex, isn't it? Like you see the whole influence, including fashion and lifestyle. Like also remember when the Parasite came out, a lot of people are talking about the sets, the building. So now I think in the next few years you'll be hearing much more about Korean design and architecture. And the Free Seoul coming to Korea already proved how much the Korean fine arts is getting attention. So yeah, I'm confident that it'll last.
So we have questions from the online viewers. Um, so one of the question is, as modern day K-style is a concoction of influences beyond the culture border, what does it mean to you to culturally identify as Korean? And what do you think, if there's a distinction, what distinction does it have from the others?
So question is what I see as something uniquely Korean. Is that right?
What does it mean to you to identify as Korean?
Oh, okay. Well, I feel very proud, and I because I have been promoting Korean culture for almost like 20
So
years
long,
now.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very proud, but
Finally, it's
yeah.
coming
But
to
I'll be
fruition.
very honest with you. So I was born and grew up in Korea. The first time I left Korea was when I did a like backpacking tour to Europe when I was a first year at university. So I really didn't. I was when I was growing up, I was so hungry for international culture because as I said, we couldn't watch like anything from Japan. And until 1988, Koreans were not allowed to travel for leisure. You had to prove to the government whether if you have a scholarship from the foreign university, or if you're going for some business conferences, because it was such a closed society. And as growing up in Korea, I was so hungry for foreign cultural influence. And I remember telling my mom, like when I was like maybe 9 and 10, like, Mom, I'm so sad that I'm born in Korea. Like I feel like, yeah, I feel like so hungry and for the new culture, and which is why my first job, I came to the UN to work at the UN because I was so hungry for interaction with diverse culture. But now ki- kids in London, they want to be born in Korea. And I didn't realize that it will only take these few decades for this sea change. So, yeah, as a Korean. But I do worry too, because the Korean society is so full of irony and contrast. And the whole competition thing, I feel like is a such double edge. It can really break the Korean society. And we have such like serious issues, as you know, Francis, like the lowest fertility rate and very huge teens like suicide rates, and yeah, strong high divorce rate. So, and the big gender gap, and even severe among younger generations. I found out from my book, uh, because women are starting to have stronger voices, so compared to my generation. So there is actually more friction. So I
No one's
do,
getting married. No one's
yeah,
having
no one wants
kids.
to
No
have,
one's
yeah,
buying houses.
right.
It's a very futuristic society at the edge of, you know,
Yeah.
teetering on the edge of something, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
And then to continue with the online question, how has K-style helped to break down stereotypes about Korea? What do you see, if there's any change on, other people's, the foreigners' view on Korea, if there has been any change? And sort of continuing on that question, what do you think is the biggest discrepancy between the Western concept of K-style versus what Koreans think of the K-style?
That's a great question. So the first one, I would say gender, like how Korean young women are changing, is really admirable. So when I watch like Korean dramas on Netflix, it it makes it cringe when I see how old Korean guys like um, deal with their wives, like how they're like yelling, like so abusive, and it makes me cringe because I know that it's not really exaggerated. It's so common in Korea, like how the older generation treat their women, and the son grow up watching that. But some of the women in my book, like Lim Kim, she was 18 when she moved to New Jersey with her parents, and there was a big TV competition audition that she won. So she went back to Korea, debuted as a singer. So the one here on the right side is how she used to be when she had this agency like dealing with her image, but she quit because she didn't feel that it was her when they tried to project this sexy and cute image. So she disappeared for 3 years, and she came back with her new song, and the title song was called Yellow, which and she it was a hip hop, a very strong visual and images, and the song was about the uh, prejudice against Asian women. And so she produced and she styled herself, everything she did. And now young Korean women really admire her. And another artist I cover in my book are called, there is a streetwear brand called Mischief, and they don't hire a professional model. Because they want to encourage, and people know how many talented and brave young women are out there. So they will work with their friends who are dancers or like documentary
More
filmmaker.
organic
Yeah,
presentation.
yeah, and they are the ones who are in their lookbooks and their runaway, and they now have a cult following among young women, and
Who
they,
really respond to that
yeah,
type
yeah, yeah.
of change. I think we're pressed for time, so I wanted to ask my final question because I know you're up to some very, very interesting projects, as always. So, can you talk a little bit about what you're working on next.
Right. But I think actually we just missed the second question by yeah. So the second question was about the discrepancy between So when I was working for the title of the book, we had a huge fight with the publisher because they always called it K-style book, but everyone, including myself and the photographer and the people I interviewed, we thought it was just
Style.
Yeah, we were going to change it. So we were stunned when they said it's going to be called The Rise of K-Style. And everybody said, no, we hate like calling it K. It's such a cliche. Like, and I had to, but the publisher was very strongly against our criticism, saying we need to sell books. People need to find it on Amazon and they need to search it. So K-Style is brilliant. And so we compromised, and they said, come up with a better title, then we might make it a subtitle. So Koreans Koreans are very reluctant to be labeled as a case that, and I think it's almost like very old way of thinking that you just label it according to the country when creators are not really consciously thinking about it, and they're just thinking all they care is their own originality. So when it comes to discrepancy, I think that, it's not, we don't want to be labeled, but
it's actually the outside perspective trying to find a commonality rather than internal.
Yeah, but then having said that, I think after interviewing all these trailblazers, I felt that there is something common, and that was brave and bold attitude. And I think that's the K-style. Yeah.
Great. And your next project?
Oh, my next project. So I happened to marry a gin distiller, 12th generation gin distiller who has been making gin since 1681 in London. And while I was doing my book, I realized that like Korean gin will be, I wanted to create a Korean London dry gin reinterpreted by Korean to reflect the Korean attitude. So that's my new project, and we are going to launch it quite soon. And
can you say what the name is?
So we have a 4-year-old son, and I was so happy when my husband George proposed that let's give him a Korean name, and he said, "How about Jun?" And Jun in Korean means like outstanding and excellent. So I said, yeah, that's brilliant. Let's call him Jun. Only realized while we are preparing for this Korean gin that Jun was named after juniper berries, which makes gin. So it was a no-brainer. So our gin is going to be called Junie. After my son. So.
Thank you so much, Fiona and Francis, for this wonderful conversation. As we mentioned earlier, the book Make Break Remix is available for sale, so make sure you get your own copy and get your autograph. And we have some drinks, speaking of which, not gin, but thanks again for everybody for coming, and thanks, Fiona and Francis, for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.